Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Yeah, we've got some excerpts. We're going to unpack some really fascinating concepts, and they can really, I think, help people listening make better decisions.
In everyday life.
Yeah, everyday life, exactly.
One of the most fundamental ideas that Kahneman presents is our minds use two systems.
Suism,
He
yeah.
calls them System 1
System 1,
and System 2.
System 2.
So maybe you can just give us like a quick rundown of those two systems.
Yeah, so System 1 is like your autopilot, right?
Yeah.
It's fast, intuitive, emotional. It's the system that helps you dodge a ball that's, hurtling towards you without even
Like
thinking.
a reflex. Almost.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's like that gut feeling, right?
Yeah.
That tells you someone's angry just from their tone of voice, even before they said anything.
Exactly. System 1 is constantly making these lightning-fast judgments based on, past experiences, patterns.
And then we have System 2,
System 2.
which is more like our inner Sherlock Holmes, right? This is what we engage when we're solving a complex math problem or carefully weighing the pros and cons of like a big decision.
Right. System 2 is slow, deliberate, analytical, requires effort,
Yeah.
concentration,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also, what allows us to think critically
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully make more rational choices.
But these two systems are constantly interacting, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like they clash. Like, have you ever been in a situation where, your gut tells you one thing,
Absolutely.
but logic's telling you something different?
All the time. And I think Kahneman does a great job of illustrating how these systems kind of play off each other
Yeah.
through some really interesting experiments.
Yeah. Give me an example.
Okay, so there's one where participants are asked to unscramble sentences.
Okay.
And some of the sentences included words
Right.
associated with the elderly, like Florida forgetful wrinkle.
Okay. So, like, they were primed with these words.
Primed, yeah.
And what happened? Did these words, like, make them feel older?
Well, not exactly feel older, but their behavior was definitely influenced.
Mm-hmm.
Those who are primed with these elderly words actually walk slower down the hallway after the experiment.
Wait, so just reading those words made them walk slower?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Isn't that wild? It
Yeah.
just shows how System 1 can operate,
Mm.
beneath our awareness, but still have a significant impact
Mm.
on our actions.
Okay, so we've got System 1 and System 2, kind of like duking it out in our minds.
Yeah.
What's the big takeaway for us? Why should we care about this?
I think the key is awareness. Once we understand how these systems work, we can start to, recognize when our intuition might be leading us astray.
Okay.
We could pause, engage System 2, and, make more deliberate choices instead of just reacting to our gut.
So it's knowing when to trust your gut and when to, like, take a step back
Exactly.
and analyze
Right.
more carefully.
Yeah.
It's like having a superpower almost. Like you can see the machinery at work
Exactly.
up there.
And that brings us to another really important concept from the book, heuristics and biases.
Heuristics, yeah. Those are like mental shortcuts, right?
Right.
We use them to make quick judgments. But you're saying those shortcuts can sometimes lead us down the wrong path?
That's right. So Kahneman explains how our reliance on these mental shortcuts, while efficient, can create predictable errors in judgment, which he calls biases.
Okay, let's dive into some examples. What about the anchoring effect?
Oh, yeah.
Is that the one where a random number can totally mess with our estimates?
That's the one.
Okay.
So in one experiment,
Mm-hmm.
participants spun a wheel of fortune that was rigged to stop on either 10 or 65.
Okay.
And then he asked them to estimate the percentage of African nations in the UN.
Wow. Would people not realize that the Wheel of Fortune was totally irrelevant?
Well,
Like, how could that influence?
the amazing thing is it did. So those who spun a 10 guessed on average that about 25% of UN nations were African. Those who spun a 65 guessed around 45%.
Wow. So even though they knew that number was meaningless, it still acted like an anchor,
It did.
pulling their estimates towards it.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
It's powerful, a powerful demonstration of how susceptible we are
Wow.
to anchoring, even when we know the anchor shouldn't matter.
Yeah. What about, like, imagine you're negotiating a salary,
Yeah.
right? And your potential employer throws out a ridiculously low number.
Right.
Even if you know it's way below your worth,
Hmm.
that number. It can still anchor the negotiation
Yeah.
and make it harder to get what you deserve.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow. Okay, anchoring. Definitely something I'm going to be more mindful of from now on.
Yeah.
What about the availability heuristic?
Yeah.
Is that the one where we overestimate the likelihood of things that are easy to recall?
That's it.
Okay.
So if something is vivid, recent, or widely reported,
Yeah.
we tend to think it's more common than it actually is.
So, like, if I just read a news article about a plane crash, I'm suddenly going to think plane crashes are way more common than, like, car accidents, for example. Even though statistically that's not true at all.
Right. It doesn't mean those events aren't a real risk, but it can really distort our perception.
Wow. It's like our minds are playing tricks on us all the time.
They are.
So we've got system 1 and system 2. We've got these heuristics that can lead to all sorts of biases.
Yeah.
What's next on our deep dive?
Well, next we're going to delve into one of the most powerful biases of all, loss aversion.
Ooh.
Are you ready for this one?
Bring it on.
Okay.
I'm all ears.
So loss aversion basically means that the pain of losing something, it feels much stronger than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value.
Okay, so like losing a $10 bill
Yeah.
would feel worse than finding a $10 bill.
Exactly. And this seemingly simple concept
Mm-hmm.
explains a lot of our behavior, especially when it comes to things like,
Okay.
investing, negotiating, all sorts of...
Yeah, that makes sense, because we're wired to avoid pain,
right.
and loss is inherently painful. This kind of reminds me of the endowment effect, which you mentioned earlier. What is that again?
The endowment effect is this fascinating tendency we have to overvalue things simply because we own them. It's,
Like hoarding.
it's like that old T-shirt
Yeah.
you never wear, but you can't bear to throw away.
Totally.
Right. It's yours. And therefore, it's imbued with this special value that it wouldn't have if it were just hanging on a rack in a store.
Yeah, I totally get that. I have a whole drawer full of those.
Right.
Is there a real-world example of how loss aversion plays out? Maybe something from the book?
Yeah. So Kahneman describes a study with professional golfers. That, I think, illustrates this perfectly. Researchers found that golfers were much more likely to try to avoid missing a par putt than they were to try and sink a birdie putt.
Wait, but isn't it the same distance, the same skill involved? Why would it matter whether they're trying to avoid a bogey or score a birdie?
It all comes down to framing. So missing a par putt feels like a loss.
Yeah.
Right? You're falling below the standard. Sinking a birdie putt is a gain. But that potential loss weighs more heavily on their minds.
Oh, interesting. So even professional golfers who are, presumably very rational,
Right.
focused on winning, are swayed by this fear of loss.
It just goes to show how deeply ingrained it is.
So what can we do about it?
Yeah.
How can we avoid falling prey to, like, loss aversion when we're making big decisions?
I think, as always, awareness is key. So when you're facing a decision, try to step back and consider whether you're overly focused on avoiding a potential loss. Ask yourself, am I being too cautious? Would I feel differently if this were framed as a potential gain
Yeah.
rather than a potential loss?
So it's about consciously shifting
Yeah.
our perspective, right? Recognizing when that fear of loss is clouding our judgment. It's like we're rewiring our brains to be more rational and less driven by, like, our emotions.
Exactly.
And speaking of how our minds, like, perceive and remember things, there's another fascinating concept that Kahneman explores that I think you'll find interesting, which is the idea of the remembering self versus the experiencing self.
Yeah, that's a great one.
What are those two selves?
Yeah.
And why do they matter?
So think about it this way. You have the self that's experiencing life.
Yeah.
In the moment, right? Feeling the sun on your skin, tasting a delicious meal, listening to your favorite music. That's the experiencing self.
Okay.
And then you have the self that looks back on those experiences and creates our memories. That's the remembering self.
Okay, so that's the one that's shaping our memory.
Exactly. But here's the catch. The remembering self doesn't necessarily remember things accurately. It tends to focus on the peak intensity of an experience and how it ended rather than, the overall duration, the sum of all the moments.
So, like, if I go on a vacation that's mostly enjoyable but has one really terrible day, my remembering self's going to latch onto that bad day and color the whole experience.
That's exactly what Kahneman's research suggests.
Wow.
He describes an experiment where participants were subjected to two versions of somewhat unpleasant experience, one longer than the other,
Okay.
but both with the same amount of total pain. However, the longer one had a less painful ending.
Okay.
So one was short and intense.
Okay.
The other was longer but ended more pleasantly. And when asked to repeat the experience, they chose the longer one with the less painful ending.
That doesn't make sense. Why would they choose more discomfort overall? Just because the ending was better?
Because our remembering self,
Okay.
the one that evaluates the experience later, doesn't accurately remember the total amount of pain.
Mm.
It's swayed by the peak intensity
Oh, wow.
and those final moments, even if they're only a small part of the overall experience.
That's both mind-blowing and kind of disturbing.
I see.
It means our memories aren't always reliable guides for, like, making future choices.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It helps explain why we might choose a vacation based on a few Instagrammable moments,
Right.
even if the rest of the trip is just average, or why we might stay in a relationship that's mostly unhappy but has these, like occasional bursts of joy.
Yeah.
Our remembering selves are drawn to those peaks and endings, even if they're not representative of the overall experience.
This is making me rethink a lot of my choices. So we have to be really careful not to let our remembering selves hijack our decision making.
Yeah, and that brings us to another crucial concept that can help us make more informed choices: the power of framing.
Framing. Okay, so that's how information is presented,
Yeah.
right? Like the spin we put on things. And you're saying that spin can actually influence our decisions.
Absolutely. Kahneman describes this classic experiment
Yeah.
where participants were presented with a problem about a disease outbreak.
Okay.
And the options were statistically identical,
Okay.
but they were framed differently,
Yeah.
either in terms of lives saved or lives lost.
So the same outcome, just described in different ways.
Exactly. And it had a profound impact on their choices.
Right.
So when the options were framed in terms of lives saved, people were more risk averse. They chose the sure thing. But when the exact same options were framed in terms of lives lost, they were more willing to take a gamble.
Wow. So even though the underlying choices were the same, their decisions completely flipped.
Yeah.
Based on whether the focus was on the positive or the negative? That's wild.
It is wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder that the way information is presented to us can have a huge influence on how we perceive it
Yeah.
and the choices we make.
Okay, this is making me think about marketing and advertising.
Oh, yeah.
Like they're using framing all the time, right?
All the time.
To kind of nudge us toward certain products or services.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've explored system 1 and system 2.
Yeah.
Heuristics and biases, loss aversion,
Yeah.
the remembering self, and the power of framing. We've covered so much ground already. What else does Kahneman have in store for us?
We'll get ready for this one. Next, we're going to delve into the world of algorithms versus experts.
Algorithms.
Yeah.
As in, like, computer programs.
As in computer programs.
Okay, what do those have to do with decision making?
More than you might think.
Yeah.
So Kahneman presents some fascinating research suggesting that in many cases, simple algorithms can actually outperform human experts when it comes to predicting outcomes.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying a computer can be smarter than a human expert?
Not necessarily smarter in the, conventional sense,
Yeah.
but often more accurate,
Yeah.
objective, yes.
I need an example here because it's hard to wrap my head around that. How can an algorithm be more accurate than a human expert?
Okay, so take the APGAR score, for example.
Hmm.
It's this simple algorithm used to assess newborn infants for distress. So before the APGAR score was developed, doctors relied solely on their own clinical judgment to determine if a baby needed immediate medical attention.
But doctors have years of training and experience. How could an algorithm possibly be more reliable than that?
Yeah, you would think. But the problem is, human judgment, even expert judgment, can be inconsistent, influenced by all sorts of biases, right? The APGAR score, on the other hand, provides this standardized objective assessment based on specific criteria.
So by taking the human element and the potential for human error out of the equation, the APGAR score actually improved the accuracy and consistency of those assessments.
Exactly. And this isn't just true for medicine. Algorithms are being used in a growing number of fields, from finance to criminal justice, to make more data-driven decisions and reduce the impact of human biases.
This is making me question the whole trust your gut philosophy. Like maybe we should be trusting algorithms more often.
It's not about abandoning intuition altogether. I think intuition is still valuable, especially in situations where there's a lot of uncertainty or incomplete information. But it's important to recognize that sometimes a more systematic, data-driven approach can lead to better outcomes.
So it's knowing when to trust our gut and when to turn to algorithms for a more objective perspective. It's like adding another tool to our decision-making toolkit.
Exactly, yeah. And it's a reminder to be humble about our own abilities and to be open to new ways of thinking.
This whole deep dive has been a humbling experience, honestly. The more we learn about how our minds work, the more we realize how much we don't know and how susceptible we are to all these biases and mental shortcuts.
And I think that's one of the most important takeaways from Kahneman's work, this importance of intellectual humility.
Yeah.
We need to be willing to question our assumptions, be open to new information, be willing to change our minds when presented with evidence that contradicts our beliefs.
And to acknowledge that sometimes a simple algorithm might actually know better than we do.
Exactly, yeah. It's a reminder that we don't always have to rely on our own. Limited cognitive abilities. We can leverage tools and systems that can help us make more informed, objective decisions.
As we're wrapping up here, I keep thinking about the idea of the remembering self and how it focuses on peaks and endings rather than the overall duration of an experience. It's like we're constantly shaping our own memories without even realizing it.
That raises an interesting question, right? If we know our remembering selves are going to be influenced by those peaks and endings, how can we consciously shape our experiences
Yeah.
to create more satisfying memories?
Yeah. I guess it means being more mindful of the small moments, savoring the good times, and maybe even finding ways to end experiences on a positive note.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we have more control over our happiness than we might think. We can choose to focus on the positive, practice gratitude, create memories that will bring us joy long after the experience is over.
Well, there you have it. We've taken a deep dive into the fascinating world of thinking fast and slow, uncovered some really powerful insights into how our minds work. We've explored the two systems of thinking, the heuristics and biases that shape our judgments, the power of loss, aversion, and framing, and the surprising effectiveness of algorithms. We've learned that our memories aren't always reliable, and that we have more control over our happiness than we might realize.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, but hopefully you walk away from this deep dive with a greater understanding of your own mind and a toolkit of strategies for making better decisions in all aspects of your life.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.